October 24, 1944. The morning sun had barely climbed over the Philippine Sea when hundreds of Japanese aircraft suddenly filled the sky. American sailors looked upward in disbelief. Dark silhouettes stretched across the horizon. Engines screamed. Anti-aircraft guns thundered. Within minutes, the largest naval battle in history was turning into complete chaos. Then, from the deck of the USS Essex, one American pilot climbed into his Grumman F-6F Hellcat. He wasn't the oldest pilot. He wasn't the most famous. And he wasn't even supposed to become America's greatest naval ace. But before the day was over, his name would become legendary. He would destroy enemy aircraft with such speed and precision that surviving Japanese pilots believed they were fighting an entire squadron instead of a single man. His actions would save countless American sailors, earn him the Medal of Honor, and cement his place in history as the deadliest fighter pilot the U.S. Navy ever produced. This is the incredible true story of Commander David McCampbell. The Pacific War had changed. By late 1944, the Pacific War had entered a new and brutal phase. For nearly 3 years, the United States had fought island by island across thousands of miles of ocean. Pearl Harbor had awakened America. Midway had shifted momentum. Guadalcanal proved Japan could be defeated. Now the Allies were preparing to return to the Philippines, a strategic prize that would cut Japan off from vital supplies of oil, food, and raw materials. For Tokyo, losing the Philippines wasn't simply another defeat. It threatened the survival of the empire itself. Japan gathered nearly every available warship for one desperate counterattack. The operation would become known as the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Historians still consider it the largest naval battle ever fought. Aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, submarines. More than 200,000 sailors, thousands of aircraft. Entire fleets collided across hundreds of miles of open ocean. Victory or defeat would shape the final months of World War II. An unlikely hero. Long before he became America's greatest naval ace, David McCampbell lived an ordinary life. He was born on January 16, 1910 in Bessemer, Alabama. Nothing about his childhood suggested that one day he would command elite fighter squadrons in the Pacific. He loved sports. He enjoyed mechanical work. Like many young Americans growing up during the Great Depression, he searched for purpose in uncertain times. The U.S. Navy offered opportunity, discipline, adventure, and eventually, the chance to fly. At first, flying wasn't glamorous. Naval aviation remained dangerous and experimental. Carrier landings terrified even experienced pilots. One mistake could send an aircraft crashing into the ocean or smashing into the deck. Many pilots never survived training. But McCampbell possessed something instructors noticed immediately. He stayed calm under pressure. Where others panicked, he analyzed. Where others hesitated, he acted. Those traits would later save his life again and again. Learning to master the sky. Becoming a naval aviator demanded absolute precision. Pilots practiced navigation over endless ocean. Formation flying. Gunnery. Carrier takeoffs. Emergency procedures. Night operations. Every landing felt like trying to place a speeding truck onto a moving football field. Unlike land bases, aircraft carriers never stopped moving. Wind shifted. Decks rolled. Visibility changed by the second. There was no room for error. McCampbell developed a reputation for discipline rather than flashy flying. He believed survival depended on preparation. Every mission began long before takeoff. He memorized enemy aircraft, studied combat reports, learned weaknesses in Japanese tactics. While some pilots relied on instinct alone, McCampbell relied on knowledge. The arrival of the Hellcat. Then everything changed. The Navy introduced a new fighter. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat. It looked massive compared with earlier fighters. Powered by a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine, the Hellcat combined speed, rugged construction, and heavy firepower. Its 6.50 caliber machine guns could shred enemy aircraft in seconds. It absorbed damage that would destroy lighter fighters. Pilots joked the Hellcat could bring them home with half its tail missing. Against Japan's famous Mitsubishi A6M0, the Hellcat possessed several critical advantages. It dove faster, protected its pilot with armor, used self-sealing fuel tanks, and carried tremendous firepower. Instead of trying to outturn the agile Zero, American pilots attacked using speed and altitude. Fire. Climb away. Attack again. The tactic proved devastating. McCampbell mastered it better than almost anyone. Leading from the front. By 1944, McCampbell wasn't simply another pilot. He commanded Fighting Squadron 15, known as VF-15. Leadership carried enormous responsibility. Most squadron commanders plan missions from relative safety. McCampbell chose something different. He always led from the front. His pilots watched every move. If he stayed calm, they stayed calm. If he attacked, they followed. His confidence spread throughout the squadron. Young aviators trusted him completely. Many later admitted they survived only because they copied his tactics. Leadership in aerial combat wasn't about giving speeches. It was about making impossible decisions in fractions of a second. Japan's final gamble. Meanwhile, Japanese commanders prepared Operation Shogo. It represented one final attempt to destroy the American invasion fleet. Aircraft carriers, many with few remaining airplanes, would lure Admiral William Halsey's powerful carrier force away from Leyte. Hidden battleship groups would then strike vulnerable American transports. Successful. Thousands of U.S. soldiers could become trapped on the beaches. The invasion might collapse. Japan knew it couldn't win a prolonged war anymore. This attack was pure desperation. Everything depended on surprise. Everything depended on speed. And everything depended on Japanese aircraft reaching American ships first. The morning of destiny. Before sunrise on October 24th, American radar operators detected massive enemy formations approaching. Alarms echoed across every carrier. Pilots sprinted toward waiting aircraft. Deck crews fueled engines. Loaded ammunition. Checked propellers. Signaled launch positions. The enormous flight decks transformed into controlled chaos. McCampbell climbed into his Hellcat. He tightened his harness. Adjusted his oxygen mask. Checked ammunition. Started the powerful engine. The propeller exploded into motion. Oil pressure. Fuel pressure. Flight controls. Everything looked perfect. One by one, Hellcats roared down the carrier deck. Each aircraft disappeared into the brightening morning sky. Ahead waited hundreds of enemy airplanes. Some carried bombs. Others torpedoes. Every one of them intended to sink American ships. None knew they were about to encounter the deadliest naval fighter pilot in American history. The hunter takes flight. As McCampbell climbed higher over the Philippine Sea, sunlight reflected across endless blue water. Below him, an entire fleet sailed toward history. Above him, enemy aircraft appeared as tiny black dots growing larger every second. Radio transmissions filled his headset. Excited voices. Warnings. Altitude reports. Enemy bearings. The calm before battle had vanished. This was the moment every fighter pilot trained for. Years of preparation. Thousands of flight hours. Hundreds of practice engagements. Everything led to this. McCampbell pushed the throttle forward. The Hellcat surged ahead. His guns were loaded. His fuel was limited. His mission was simple. Protect the fleet. No matter the cost. The battle for the skies above Leyte Gulf was about to begin. And within the next few hours, David McCampbell would perform one of the greatest feats in the history of aerial warfare. The sky above the Philippine Sea looked almost peaceful from a distance. Brilliant blue water stretched to every horizon. Thin white clouds drifted silently overhead. Far below, the powerful ships of the U.S. Third Fleet cut through calm waves in perfect formation. But that illusion lasted only seconds. Radar operators aboard the American carriers watched glowing blips multiply across their screens. One formation. Then another. Then another. The reports kept coming. Large enemy aircraft formation, bearing west. Additional contacts, high altitude. Multiple groups approaching. Within minutes, it became clear this wasn't another small Japanese raid. It was a massive coordinated attack. The Imperial Japanese Navy was throwing everything it had left into the battle. If those bombers reached the American fleet, the consequences would be catastrophic. Aircraft carriers carrying hundreds of fighters, fuel ships, troop transports, destroyers protecting the invasion force. Thousands of American sailors were suddenly in danger. There would be no second chance. The enemy had to be stopped in the air. Commander David McCampbell pushed the throttle of his Grumman F-6F Hellcat to full power. The engine roared with nearly 2,000 horsepower. His aircraft surged forward, climbing rapidly through scattered clouds. Around him, dozens of Hellcats formed into combat groups. Each pilot scanned the sky. Every movement mattered. Every decision could mean life or death. Unlike modern fighter pilots guided by computers and radar displays, these men relied almost entirely on their own eyes. A split-second delay could be fatal. The first enemy aircraft finally came into view. Tiny black dots. Then dozens. then what seemed like an endless stream. Japanese fighters escorted bombers flying toward the American fleet in disciplined formations. For many young American pilots, the sight was intimidating. Some had never faced such a large force. But McCampbell remained calm. Years of training had taught him one simple lesson. Never focus on the entire battle. Focus on the next target. The Japanese Mitsubishi A6M0 was still a dangerous opponent. Lightweight, extremely maneuverable, deadly in experienced hands. Its pilots had spent years fighting across the Pacific. Many were veterans. But by late 1944, things had changed. Japan had lost many of its most experienced aviators. Replacement pilots often received only a fraction of the training earlier generations had enjoyed. Fuel shortages reduced flying hours. Combat experience became increasingly rare. America, meanwhile, had improved both its aircraft and its pilot training. The F-6F Hellcat was designed specifically to defeat the Zero. It could dive faster, absorb more damage, carry heavier weapons. Most importantly, it allowed disciplined pilots like McCampbell to dictate the terms of the fight. McCampbell spotted a formation of enemy fighters crossing in front of him. He didn't hesitate. He climbed above them. Altitude meant energy. Energy meant speed. Speed meant survival. He rolled the Hellcat onto its wing, pointed the nose downward. The aircraft accelerated rapidly. Wind screamed across the canopy. The Japanese pilots below had only seconds to react. McCampbell lined up his first target. The gun sight settled. He squeezed the trigger. 6.50 caliber machine guns erupted simultaneously. Bright streams of tracers reached toward the enemy aircraft. The first burst struck the Zero's wing. Pieces flew away instantly. A second burst shattered the engine. Flames exploded from the nose. The fighter rolled violently before disappearing into the clouds below. One enemy aircraft destroyed. But there was no time to celebrate. 3 more fighters turned toward him. Dogfighting was unlike anything shown in Hollywood movies. There were no long conversations over the radio. No dramatic pauses. No music. Only speed, noise, and constant danger. Aircraft crossed paths at hundreds of miles per hour. A target could appear and disappear in less than 2 seconds. Pilots had to think instinctively. McCampbell pulled sharply upward. The Hellcat climbed while the pursuing Zeros tried to follow. Their lighter aircraft turned more tightly. But McCampbell wasn't trying to outturn them. He was forcing them to lose speed. As the Japanese fighters slowed, he rolled over the top of the climb. Suddenly he was behind them. One quick burst. Another enemy aircraft caught fire. A second pilot bailed out as smoke poured from his engine. The remaining fighters scattered. Below the aerial battle, American sailors watched in amazement. Tiny aircraft twisted through the sky. White contrails crossed in every direction. Black bursts of anti-aircraft fire filled the air around incoming bombers. Some Japanese aircraft continued toward the fleet despite heavy losses. These pilots knew their chances of survival were almost non-existent. Yet many pressed forward anyway. The determination on both sides made the battle even more intense. McCampbell's radio filled with urgent calls. Bandits at 12 o'clock. Bombers breaking through. Need assistance. Without hesitation, he turned toward the greatest threat. A formation of Japanese dive bombers had slipped past the first line of American fighters. If they reached the carriers, dozens of bombs could devastate the fleet. McCampbell increased speed. His Hellcat closed the distance rapidly. He selected the trailing bomber. Fired. The aircraft burst into flames. Without slowing down, he shifted to the next target. Another burst. Another explosion. The formation began to fall apart. Bombers scattered in every direction. Some jettisoned their bombs early. Others attempted desperate evasive maneuvers. The coordinated attack had dissolved into chaos. What separated McCampbell from many fighter pilots wasn't just his accuracy. It was his discipline. He never chased a damaged aircraft all the way to the ocean. If an enemy was already falling, he immediately searched for the next threat. His priority wasn't increasing his personal score. It was protecting the fleet. That mindset made him extraordinarily effective. Every second saved meant another American ship might survive. As the battle intensified, fuel became an invisible enemy. Every minute spent in combat reduced the chances of returning safely to the carrier. Pilots constantly checked their gauges. Too little fuel meant ditching into the ocean. Too much caution meant allowing enemy bombers through. McCampbell balanced aggression with calculation. He knew exactly how long he could remain in the fight. Even under enormous pressure, he never lost awareness of the bigger picture. Around him, the sky had become a maze of twisting aircraft. Smoke trails marked destroyed fighters. Parachutes drifted slowly toward the sea. Burning wreckage splashed into the water below. The battle stretched across miles of open sky. Everywhere he looked, another fight was unfolding. Yet McCampbell continued moving from one engagement to the next with remarkable composure. Years later, fellow pilots would remember that he seemed almost impossible to rattle. While others reacted emotionally, he remained focused entirely on the mission. Then came another warning over the radio. A fresh wave of enemy aircraft was approaching. The battle was far from over. In fact, the most extraordinary moments of David McCampbell's combat career were still ahead. Before the day ended, his actions would become one of the greatest aerial performances in the history of the U.S. Navy, and a defining chapter in the air war over the Pacific. The greatest dogfight. The battle over the Philippine Sea had already lasted for hours. Pilots were exhausted. Hands ached from gripping flight controls. Eyes burned from searching endless skies for enemy aircraft. Fuel gauges dropped lower with every passing minute. But for Commander David McCampbell, the mission was far from over. Because another enemy formation had been detected. And this one was larger. Much larger. Far to the west, Japanese aircraft continued advancing toward the American fleet. Fighters, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, wave after wave. Japan was making one final desperate attempt to stop the American return to the Philippines. If these aircraft reached the carriers below, the consequences could be devastating. McCampbell knew there was only one option. Intercept them. Immediately. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat surged forward through the sky. Its massive engine roared at full power. Around McCampbell, American fighters spread out, searching for targets. Then suddenly, enemy aircraft appeared ahead. Dozens of them. Dark shapes against bright clouds. The Japanese formation stretched across the horizon. For a brief moment, the scale of the battle was overwhelming. But McCampbell had learned something important in combat. Large battles were won one target at a time. One decision at a time. One attack at a time. He climbed above the enemy. Altitude meant advantage. Speed meant survival. The Hellcat rolled onto its side. The nose dropped. The aircraft accelerated. Faster. Faster. Wind screamed over the canopy. The enemy fighters below had almost no warning. McCampbell lined up his first target. The gun sight settled. He fired. 6 machine guns erupted together. Tracer rounds crossed the sky. The Japanese fighter exploded into smoke and flame. One down. Immediately he searched for another target. No hesitation. No celebration. Only focus. A second fighter crossed his path. Another burst. Another enemy aircraft fell. Then a third. And a fourth. The battle became a blur of movement. Twisting aircraft. Rapid turns. Diving attacks. Smoke trails. Flashes of gunfire. Pilots lived moment to moment. Second by second. What made McCampbell extraordinary wasn't just skill. It was awareness. Many pilots became trapped in individual dogfights. McCampbell constantly scanned the entire battle. He looked above, below, behind, ahead. He always searched for the next threat. That habit saved lives. And it saved his own life more than once. The Japanese pilots fought fiercely. Despite overwhelming losses throughout the war, many remained courageous and determined. Some attacked American formations head-on. Others tried to lure fighters into turning battles. A few pressed forward toward the fleet even while their aircraft burned. This was not an easy victory. Every enemy pilot represented danger. Every mistake could be fatal. The sky over Leyte Gulf had become chaos. American ships below fired thousands of anti-aircraft shells. Black clouds of exploding flak filled the air. Aircraft crossed paths at incredible speeds. A fighter seen one moment disappeared the next. Smoke drifted through the battle. Visibility changed constantly. And through it all, McCampbell remained calm. Years of discipline had prepared him for this moment. Then came one of the most remarkable episodes of the war. On October 24, 1944, McCampbell and his wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, found themselves facing an overwhelming number of enemy aircraft. Some reports suggested more than 40 enemy planes. Others estimated even more. Whatever the exact number, the situation was dangerous. 2 American fighters. Against an entire enemy formation. Most pilots might have withdrawn. Most commanders might have waited for reinforcements. McCampbell did neither. He attacked. The 2 Hellcats dived toward the Japanese aircraft. Speed increased rapidly. The enemy formation suddenly broke apart. Fighters turned. Bombers scattered. The sky erupted into individual battles. McCampbell selected target after target. Fire. Climb. Turn. Attack again. Everything happened incredibly fast. The Hellcat's machine guns hammered continuously. Enemy aircraft burst into flames. Smoke trails marked the sky. Pilots bailed out. Wreckage fell toward the ocean. Again and again McCampbell struck. Years later, witnesses still struggled to describe the pace of the battle. It seemed impossible. One pilot appearing everywhere at once. One fighter attacking repeatedly. One man changing the course of an entire engagement. But victory came at a cost. Fuel gauges dropped dangerously low. Every attack consumed precious fuel. Every maneuver reduced the chances of returning safely. Carrier pilots always lived with a hidden enemy. Not bullets. Not enemy fighters. Fuel. Run out too far from the fleet, and survival became uncertain. McCampbell knew time was running out. Yet enemy aircraft still threatened American ships. So he continued fighting. By the end of the mission, McCampbell had achieved one of the greatest aerial performances in U.S. Navy history. His victories that day would help earn him the Medal of Honor. More importantly, his actions helped protect the fleet during one of the largest naval battles ever fought. The numbers alone were extraordinary. Across his combat career, McCampbell achieved 34 confirmed aerial victories, the highest total of any U.S. Navy pilot during World War II. But numbers tell only part of the story. His greatest contribution was leadership, discipline, calm under pressure, the ability to make correct decisions when everything around him was chaos. Those qualities inspired the pilots who flew beside him, and they saved countless American lives. As the battle began to fade, the sky slowly grew quieter. Smoke drifted over distant waters. Damaged aircraft limped back toward carriers. Rescue ships searched for downed aviators. The massive naval battle continued across hundreds of miles. But one thing was now certain. The Japanese attack had failed. The American fleet remained in the fight. And David McCampbell had secured his place in history. Yet the war was not over. Many difficult battles still lay ahead. Kamikaze attacks would soon begin. More lives would be lost. More sacrifices would be required. But the balance of power in the Pacific had changed forever. Japan's ability to replace experienced pilots was collapsing. American industry continued producing ships, aircraft, and trained aviators at astonishing speed. The outcome of the war was becoming increasingly clear. And in that long struggle across the Pacific Ocean, few men symbolized American naval aviation better than Commander David McCampbell. Medal of Honor and Legacy. The smoke had begun to clear. The roar of engines faded into the distance. For the pilots returning to their carriers, the adrenaline of combat gave way to exhaustion. Many aircraft landed riddled with bullet holes. Some touched down with barely enough fuel to remain airborne. Others never returned at all. Flight deck crews rushed into action. Damaged Hellcats rolled to a stop. Mechanics inspected shattered wings and punctured fuselages. Medical teams helped wounded aviators from their cockpits. Only then did the full scale of the battle begin to emerge. Reports from across the fleet confirmed that the American carriers had survived another massive Japanese air assault. The enemy had suffered devastating losses. And once again, Commander David McCampbell had been at the center of the action. The cost of victory. War is often measured in victories and defeats. But those who fight it remember something else. The empty chairs. The missing voices. The friends who never returned. Even after successful missions, fighter squadrons gathered to count aircraft, not just victories. Every missing pilot represented a family waiting at home. Every empty bunk was a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. McCampbell understood this better than anyone. He never celebrated combat as a game. He viewed every mission as a responsibility. His first duty was always protecting the fleet and bringing as many of his pilots home as possible. That quiet professionalism earned him the respect of everyone who served alongside him. A hero honored. News of McCampbell's extraordinary performance quickly spread through the U.S. Navy. His courage under overwhelming odds, his exceptional leadership, and his determination to continue fighting despite dwindling fuel all stood out. For his actions during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Commander David McCampbell was awarded the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest military decoration. The citation praised not only his remarkable aerial victories but also his fearless leadership in defending the fleet during one of the most critical moments of the Pacific War. To McCampbell, however, the medal represented something larger than personal achievement. It honored every sailor on the carriers, every mechanic who kept aircraft flying, every radar operator who detected incoming raids, every wingman who trusted their leader. He often reminded others that no fighter pilot wins alone. Victory in the air depends on teamwork on the ground and at sea. The war takes a dark turn. Although American forces had gained the advantage, Japan refused to surrender. As its experienced pilots disappeared and aircraft shortages worsened, Japanese commanders adopted increasingly desperate tactics. Late in 1944, the world witnessed the large-scale arrival of the kamikaze. Instead of dropping bombs and returning home, these pilots deliberately crashed their aircraft into Allied ships. It was a shocking strategy. American sailors watched enemy planes dive directly toward carriers, destroyers, and battleships with no attempt to escape. Even damaged aircraft became deadly weapons. The Pacific War entered one of its most brutal phases. McCampbell and other Navy fighter pilots now faced an even greater challenge. They had to destroy attacking aircraft before they reached the fleet. Sometimes that meant intercepting enemy planes only seconds before impact. The pressure on fighter squadrons increased dramatically throughout the final months of war. Throughout 1945, American forces continued advancing toward Japan. Island after island fell under Allied control. The U.S. Navy dominated the Pacific. New aircraft carriers joined the fleet. Factories across America continued producing thousands of aircraft every month. Meanwhile, Japan struggled with fuel shortages, limited industrial capacity, and a shrinking pool of trained pilots. The balance of power had shifted permanently. Veteran leaders like McCampbell played a crucial role in training younger aviators. His combat experience became just as valuable as his flying skills. He emphasized discipline over recklessness, preparation over overconfidence, observation over emotion. Those lessons saved lives long after his own combat missions ended. The highest-scoring U.S. Navy ace. By the end of World War II, David McCampbell had achieved 34 confirmed aerial victories, making him the highest-scoring ace in the history of the U.S. Navy. What made that accomplishment remarkable wasn't simply the number. It was how he achieved it. He wasn't known for unnecessary risks. He didn't chase glory. He relied on planning, positioning, and patience. He understood his aircraft. He studied his enemy. And he remained calm when others panicked. Those qualities transformed him from an excellent pilot into one of the greatest fighter leaders of the war. Even decades later, military historians continue to study his tactics. His success demonstrated that discipline and teamwork could overcome overwhelming odds. Life after the war. When World War II finally ended in 1945, millions of servicemen returned home. Like many veterans, McCampbell carried memories that would remain with him forever. He continued serving in the United States Navy during the post-war years, helping shape the next generation of naval aviation. The world around him changed rapidly. Propeller-driven fighters gave way to jet aircraft. Aircraft carriers became larger and more advanced. Radar, guided missiles, and new technologies transformed aerial combat. Yet the core principles McCampbell believed in never changed. Preparation, leadership, discipline, trust. Those values remained essential regardless of how technology evolved. A legacy that endures. Today, David McCampbell's name appears in military history books, museums, and naval aviation exhibits across the United States. His story represents more than personal achievement. It represents the determination of an entire generation. Young men who crossed oceans, faced impossible odds, and helped defeat one of the most powerful military forces of the 20th century. Modern Navy pilots still study World War II air combat. Not because today's battles look the same, but because courage, leadership, and sound decision-making never become outdated. McCampbell's legacy lives on every time a new naval aviator climbs into the cockpit of an American aircraft. The human side of history. When people hear that David McCampbell scored 34 aerial victories, it's easy to focus only on the numbers. But history is about more than statistics. Behind every aircraft was a pilot. Behind every mission was a family waiting for someone to come home. The Pacific War demanded enormous sacrifices from everyone involved. Remembering that human cost helps us understand why stories like McCampbell's matter. They remind us not only of courage but also of the price paid for peace. On that October day in 1944, as the skies above Leyte Gulf erupted into one of history's greatest air battles, one American naval aviator proved that preparation, courage, and leadership could change the course of combat. David McCampbell didn't become America's greatest naval ace because he sought fame. He became a legend because, when his country needed him most, he flew toward danger instead of away from it. His 34 confirmed victories remain unmatched in U.S. Navy history, but his greatest achievement was protecting the sailors below and leading by example in the face of overwhelming odds. His story reminds us that history isn't shaped only by fleets and armies, it is often shaped by the decisions of one determined individual in a single cockpit. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more incredible true stories from World War II, be sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, and let us know in the comments which forgotten hero or historic battle you'd like us to cover next. Until next time, thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next documentary.